So I want to begin by asking you to think about a time that you were fabulously productive. Maybe you were sitting at your desk in your office, you had your headphones on, and you were in the zone. The code was moving directly from your mind to your fingertips up on the screen. You weren't getting syntax errors. You weren't having to check Stack Overflow every 5 minutes. Your automated tests were actually passing. I mean, you were nailing it. Maybe you felt like a pop star, right? But then you got the dreaded tap on the shoulder. And someone said, I'm going to let you finish, but first, I'm going to ask you a question. And maybe that question was like super important, like maybe everything had crashed in production and you were the only person who could fix it and they really needed your help. Or maybe they just wanted to talk about how awful the last season of Game of Thrones was. Whatever the case, you answer their question, they go on their way, and you're left sitting there like, what? And you've got to figure out how to get back in that zone, right? And maybe you're going to try to get there. Or maybe you've got a meeting in 20 minutes, so you're not even going to bother because you know you're not going to get back in that zone. And so you've got this huge chunk of productivity that's just gone. It's lost. And that's why open office spaces can be the worst, right? You've got those drive-by distractions. You don't have any privacy. It can be kind of a rough situation. Now, CubeLand offers you the illusion of privacy, but you still don't have privacy. You still have to be kind of quiet. You can't listen to your music loudly. It's not always a great situation. Now, as you'll find out throughout this presentation, I am a huge advocate for remote work. But to be fair, working remotely can also be the worst. Now, I don't know if you guys remember a couple years ago, there was a guy who took an interview for the BBC out of his home office. And it was a very serious topic, but things did not go as he planned. So let me show you.
Scandals happen all the time. The question is how democracies respond to those scandals. For the wider region, I think one of your children has just walked in. I mean, shifting sands in the region. Do you think relations with the North may change?
I would be surprised if they do. My apologies.
For the region.
My apologies.
So I think we all got the gist, even though we couldn't hear the sound there. But I think we can agree on two things. First, that mom was nailing it. I mean, she was giving it her all. But second, in that particular moment, that guy failed at working remotely. So today we're going to be examining the question, does remote work really work? So some of you are probably pretty skeptical. You've seen interviews like this. You've heard people's dogs barking in the background of conference calls. And you're thinking, it's probably not possible to be as productive. Maybe you can't be as collaborative or as innovative when you work remotely. So we'll talk about that and examine what the research says. And some of you might be interested in working remotely, but your company doesn't have a remote work policy. And so you're thinking, there's no way my boss will ever let me work remotely. So we'll talk about how to convince your boss that remote work is a fantastic option. And finally, some of you in here probably want to work remotely, or you've tried it and you've struggled. And so we'll talk about my top 5 tips for how to be a successful remote employee. My hope is that by the end of this session, you'll be able to answer the question for yourself, does remote work really work? So I want to kick things off by sharing with you my own personal story of remote work. And to do that, we're going to travel back in time to 2008. It was a simpler time. Blackberries were super popular. We all thought rickrolling someone was hilarious. And Beyonce was encouraging men to put a ring on it. Well, that summer, my boyfriend of the time did just that. He proposed. I said yes. We were in love. Life was great. That same summer, we interned at places in our respective industries. So I was a computer science major. I interned at IBM as a software engineer. And my fiance was a nuclear engineer, so he interned at a nuclear power plant. So that fall, we went back to try and finish grad school, and I started interviewing for full-time positions. And I was very lucky. I got 3 different offers from IBM where I had interned. And I was like, this is fantastic. The problem was that the hiring managers were starting to pressure me, and they were saying, Lauren, we really need to know yes or no, are you going to work for us? But the hiring cycle for nuclear engineers didn't start till the following spring. And the problem with nuclear engineering is you kind of have to work at the power plant, and there are very few jobs. And so I knew that ultimately I wanted to live in the same location as my husband, but we didn't know where that was going to be. So the hiring managers were like, Lauren, we really need to know if you're going to work for us. And I was like, okay, fine. I'm just going to put all my cards on the table. So I called them up and I said, look, I can commit to working for you in the office for 1 year. After that, I'm going to get married. There's a possibility I can stay in Raleigh, keep working for you, but there's a possibility I'm going to need to move. So I asked them straight up, after a year, will you let me work from home? And one of the managers was like, no. And one of the managers was like, well, maybe, it depends on your performance and how your team lead feels. And one of the managers was like, oh yeah, that's no problem at all, no biggie. So it was a very easy decision. I didn't care about, what products I was going to be working on, the technologies, the teammates. I was like, yes, you're going to let me keep my job. Perfect, I'll sign with you. So I signed my job offer. And that spring, my fiance got a job offer from a company up in Maryland, which was about 5 or 6 driving hours away. And so he accepted it, and we were very glad that I had negotiated this remote work option. So that spring, we graduated. I had all of my new hire enthusiasm with me, and I started working for IBM full-time. And I went to work in CubeLand. And CubeLand can be the worst. It was the worst for me. The gray walls were very drab. I actually decided to wallpaper my cube walls with wrapping paper just to give it a little more pizzazz. I didn't have access to any sunlight, natural light, because I had the gray cube walls. People would glare at me when I would yell down the hallway. It was not a great situation. So after a year of working in CubeLand, I got married, which was super exciting, and then I went off to work remotely. And to be really honest with you guys, at first, working remotely was the worst. I had a lot of adjustments in my life when I started working remotely. I went from having lots of local friends to having one set of couple friends. I went from seeing people in the office every day to only seeing my husband. And when he would come home, I would talk his ear off. I went from being in a big town with lots to do to being in a very small town where going to Target just to pick up our daily necessities was kind of an exciting thing I would look forward to on Friday nights. I went from living in an apartment by myself to living in an apartment with my husband who did not share my same standards of tidiness. And I was struggling. I actually used to daydream about when I would have kids and it would be socially acceptable for me to stop working. Like I was burning out. It was not great. But after about 6 months, I started to come out of the fog, and working remotely became the best. I started to really enjoy it. My career started to gain momentum. I switched teams to gain new skills and work on new projects. I started speaking at conferences. At one conference I was at, I led a Birds of a Feather session for people who work remotely. And an IBM executive happened to be there. And she was like, Lauren, I can see a lot of value in providing a community for people who work remotely. And so I think you should do this for people at IBM. And so I thought to myself, I don't know how to lead a group, a networking group, but you are an executive, so I'm going to say yes. So I said yes. We figured it out. I built a leadership team around me. And we grew that group to 11,000 people at IBM. We had 11,000 remote workers at IBM. This was a huge leadership opportunity for me that I wouldn't have otherwise had. It was incredible. So my career started to gain momentum. Life was good. After 8 years at IBM, I went on to be a developer advocate at Sugar CRM. And then this last November, I joined MongoDB to be a developer advocate for them. And through all of the career transitions, the different teams, the different companies, I've continued to be a remote employee. So I've been remote since 2010, so almost 9 years. And I love it. And I don't see myself ever going back in an office. In fact, on the rare occasions I go back for a couple days, I struggle. I get distracted by those side conversations, and I have trouble really focusing. So I love remote work. I have a feeling, that's enough talking about me. Let's talk about you. Perhaps some of you want to work remotely. So I'm going to ask you guys some reasons why you might want to work remotely. So I'm going to ask you just to raise your hand. It's not scary. If any of these apply to you. So how many of you are, if you had to take a new job, you would be unable to relocate, maybe due to a spouse's job, or you've got kids in school that you don't want to pull out of school? I know a lot of times when their kids get into the high school years, those higher years, they don't want to move them. It's fairly common. How about, who has a commute that's 20 minutes or longer? Yeah, that's not really fun, right? Stop and go traffic can be soul-sucking. And think about all the things you could be doing if you weren't commuting, right? Because that's not helping your job necessarily, unless you're working on a bus. But in most cases, it's not helping your job. So you could be spending time with your kids or your pets or volunteering or exercising or maybe just sleeping, right? Commutes are not fun. All right, how many people need to be available for children or aging parents? They don't need, hands-on care, but you just need to be physically present. So I've just discovered in the US that if you want to get your kid off the school bus, you have to be there to pick them up. So they won't let my kid off the school bus unless I'm physically there. So at 3 o'clock every day, I've got to be there for the school bus, which is crazy. So she doesn't need hands-on care necessarily after that, but I just have to be there every single day. All right, how many people find office environments distracting? Okay, everybody, yes. Okay, I won't cover this. We're all in agreement. Last one, how many people like to travel? Yes. Okay, so this one is my favorite too. So I've known people who have sold or rented out their homes and traveled the world while continuing to make a full-time salary. There are now programs that will help facilitate this. So you bring your own job, and they will let you sign up for a cohort for 6 months or a year, and they handle all of your travel arrangements for you. So they handle your flights, your hotel, and they even set up activities where you are. So you get to work during the day and then enjoy visiting cool locations on your nights and weekends, which is amazing. So those are some of the reasons why people would want to work remotely. But why would employers want to offer remote work options, right? Like, it seems like it would be easier to manage people when you can measure their butt and seat time, right? People like to see. It's easier to manage people you can see. Yes, so what he just said is that he's a freelancer and clients want to see him at a desk or they think he's slacking. Yes, so true, yes.
I'm in some kind of funny position right here. I'm physically in the office for my employer, but I work remotely for my employer's clients. So I must be in line of sight from my employer, so they know I'm there working. And also, the clients, they feel there's a certain disconnection from me as a technician, since they don't actually see me. So there's that funny position where I'm actually working in an office and remotely at the same time with half of the benefits and both of the bad sides.
And both of the bad sides. That's horrible. Do you want me using this mic? Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. We got one more comment back here.
So I'm kind of in the same situation. My manager is located at Scottsdale. We are located in Mexico City office, but we have our offices there. And even though both my director and my manager are located in Scottsdale, they don't like us working from home. So even though we're in a different country and we're kind of working remotely already, and we don't have a need to be in the office, they always want us there.
Yeah, there's this feeling that it's easier to manage when you can see people. They want to know that you're working. And it is a shift from thinking about measuring productivity and measuring results versus measuring seat time. Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about why would employers offer remote work options? Because it sounds like some people have them, some people are like, no. So what do you guys think? What are some reasons why employers would offer remote work options? This is the only time I'll make you talk the whole talk. Any reasons? Say that again? Save resources, yeah. Yes, it's cheaper if you're not paying for office space. Is that what you're? Yes. I'm gonna come back to you.
For the talent pool?
Yes, for the talent pool, exactly. If you are asking people to move to a specific location, you've got a very limited group of people. If you open your location up to remote, you get a worldwide talent pool. I love that.
To have happy employees.
Yes, happy employees, employee morale, right? Employees love work-life flexibility. Anything else? I think you guys actually hit my list. Yeah, and then the last one is increase employee productivity, and I'm going to hit on that in the next section. So I have a feeling some people here are like, okay, this is kind of anecdotal, you know, this is a little soft. What does the research actually say? Because you're engineers, right? You want to know the stats. So let's get into that. So I'm going to go through a couple studies with you. The first one is the 2019 Stack Overflow study. Did anybody here take it? A few people? Okay, so it's put on by the people of Stack Overflow, and their goal is to get a diverse set of developers from all over the world to respond. And so they ask a lot of questions like, what's your favorite programming language? What database would you most like to use? The answer is MongoDB. Okay, and then they also ask work-life flexibility questions, so that's what I'm going to focus in on. So they asked, where do developers want to work? And as you can see, about 60% want to work in the office, but the remaining 40% want to work somewhere else, like their home or another place. So 40% is a pretty big chunk of developers. I'm pausing because I see a bunch of cameras up. Okay. The next thing they asked is, how often do you actually get to work remotely? So up at the top, you see people who really never get to work remotely, and as you move down towards the bottom are people who get to work remotely full-time. So 43% never. Down towards the bottom, we see 12% full-time remote. One of the really interesting statistics they pulled out of this is that developers who work remotely full-time have on average about 60% more years of professional coding experience than those who never do. So the more coding experience you have, the more likely you are to be remote. We can guess about why that is. Perhaps if you have more experience, you've got a little more negotiating power, or perhaps you have more time at your company, so people trust you. So they don't feel like they're having to, wonder what you're up to. All right, one more result from this particular study. They asked developers to select up to 3 items that represent their greatest challenge to productivity. So everybody could pick 3. And I'm going to go through the 2 highlighted in yellow here. So up at the top, the number 1 greatest challenge to productivity is a distracting work environment. And we talked about that. Like everybody agreed office environments were distracting, and that's something we can eliminate with remote work. Down towards the bottom, we see time spent commuting. 20% of developers selected that. And that's something we can completely eliminate with remote work. And I'll mention quickly, while people are taking pictures of slides, the slides are available online. They're linked on my Twitter page, so if you want to take a look at those later, they are posted. All right, one more study for you. This is my favorite study, and I think you guys are going to like this one too. This is a great one to send to your boss to convince them to let you work remotely. So this was a 2014 scientific study published in the Quarterly Journal of Economics. So it's a journal study. It's typically a higher quality study, peer-reviewed. And the researchers worked with Ctrip, which was a Chinese travel agency with 16,000 employees. And they narrowed down their experiment to specifically on call center employees. And so they said, of the call center employees, do you want to work remotely? Of the ones who said yes, they created their experiment. So everybody who said yes, they were put in either the control group to stay in the office or the treatment group to work remotely. And that's what makes this study so great, because a lot of times remote work studies are kind of surveys after the fact, and it's kind of hard to attribute the results most definitely to remote work. But here, everybody had the same motivation. They all wanted to work remotely. And then we have a very clear control and treatment group. So here's what they found. They found a 13% performance increase in work from home employees. That's pretty good, right? 13%. Okay, so why was that? Well, 9% of that was from working more minutes per shift, which at first sounds a little funny, like working more minutes per shift, because a shift is a given number of minutes. But what they found was that remote employees were present for more minutes. They took shorter breaks, and they took fewer sick days. Confession here, I've actually had pink eye more than once this year. I have a toddler, so pink eye is pretty disgusting, but I was able to work through it because I didn't have to worry about infecting anybody else at the office. I just turned off my webcam so nobody had to look at me, and I kept right on working. So remote employees typically show up and work more often. The other 4% of that 13% was actually from taking more calls per minute. So the work from home employees were in a quieter environment. They were actually able to be more productive and get more done. They also found a statistically significant higher work satisfaction in work from home employees. That's great. That's the employee morale we talked about. Now, they also found a 50% reduction in attrition rate in work from home employees. So attrition is people leaving, and attrition is a huge problem, right? It costs a lot of money to recruit, hire, train new employees. So if you called your HR department and you said, hey, I know how we're going to reduce attrition rate by 50%, they would be like, tell me now, right? This is a huge statistic. All right, one thing that's not so great that they found in this study, they found a 50% reduction in promotion rate conditional on performance for work from home employees. So remote employees were not promoted at the same rate. Not so great. Okay, why is this? They had 3 reasons. First, the age-old, out of sight, out of mind, right? If you're picking who you're going to promote, you're going to tend to pick people you see and work with every day. Also, in the developer world, a lot of times you can move up the individual contributor track, right? So you don't have to switch into management. You can keep becoming a higher level developer. That was not the case here. They were call center employees, and a promotion was to a team lead or a management position. In order to get that position, you had to demonstrate interpersonal skills. So the remote employees didn't have a chance to develop these skills or demonstrate them, so they think that may be why they were not promoted as quickly. Final reason is that while they allowed the call center employees to work remotely, they didn't allow their team leads or their managers to work remotely. And so it's very possible that the remote employees were being more productive, they were getting higher commissions, and they were just like, it's not worth it to me to go back in the office. I like working remotely, so they just opted out of requesting for a promotion. All right, so that one, not so great, but we're going to come back to that one in a few minutes. All right, last statistic from this study. So if you remember, the very first one I gave you was that they saw a 13% performance increase in work from home employees. So at the end of the experiment, they said, you know what, this is working. So everybody, you can work wherever you want. So some of the office employees decided to work remotely. Some of the remote employees decided to go back in the office. Everybody switched around. Then they measured their performance 3 months later, and they found a 22% performance increase after allowing employees to choose where to work. 22%. That's the equivalent of an extra workday every single week just by giving people workplace flexibility. It's incredible. So in this study, we saw that allowing employees the option of working remotely was great for the employee, and it was great for the employer. I'm going to go through one more study a little quicker this time. In 2009, Cisco allowed their employees to work remotely for a year, and then they measured the results through a survey. Here's what they found. They found a significant increase in productivity, work-life flexibility, and job satisfaction. That's fantastic for the employees. They found a $277 million savings in productivity from teleworking. That's amazing for the employer. And they found a 47,320 metric tons of greenhouse gas emissions were not released in 1 year due to teleworking. That's amazing for the environment. So another study was conducted, and it was a literature review. So they said, you know what, I'm not going to do another study. What I'm going to do is I'm going to look at all the studies over 20 years, and they ended up examining 46 studies. I'm going to read the conclusion to you because I think it's so good. So telecommuting has a clear upside, small but favorable effects on perceived autonomy, work-family conflict, job satisfaction, performance, turnover intent, and stress. Contrary to expectations in both academic and practitioner literatures, telecommuting also has no straightforward damaging effects on the quality of workplace relationships or perceived career prospects. So let's break this down. We've got a repetition of what we saw earlier. We saw an increase in job satisfaction, performance, and turnover intent, or reduction in turnover intent. That's our attrition rate. And then contrary to what they expected, they saw no damaging effects on perceived career prospects, which is fantastic, right? So even though that earlier study saw issues with promotion rate, when they examined the studies over 20 years, they did not find that to be a problem. All right, so some of you are probably like, okay, Lauren, you like your remote work. You're going to tell us all the good and rosy things. There are a few downsides that the research found. So professional isolation negatively impacts job performance. But I think this is true whether or not you're a remote employee, right? Like, if you want to do your job well, you have to be able to constantly communicate with those below you, your peers, and those above you. Another study said maybe it doesn't matter where I'm located. Maybe it matters where my manager is located. And they actually found that having a remote manager may negatively impact you. And to me, this really ties into that previous bullet. So if you have a remote manager who's professionally isolated, they're going to struggle to advocate for you. So you want to make sure, if you're selecting a manager, that they are well connected and they're going to be ready to advocate for you. Another study found that remote employees fear stalling careers, isolation, distractions, and blurred lines between work and home life. And this is true. When I started working remotely, those were things I feared. But now these are things that I actively work to combat. I don't fear these anymore. Last one. This one may be surprising for those of you who have not worked remotely. So remote work actually encourages employees to overwork and to allow their work to infringe on their family role. So I'm going to come back to this in a later slide because I know you're flashing time at me. So we'll keep moving. But yes. All right, so we've been asking the question, does remote work really work? Yes, right? The studies show remote work works for the employee, the employer, and the environment. So some of you are like, yes, all right, I'm on board. I want to work remotely. How am I going to convince my boss to let me work remotely? So let's talk about that. I love what the authors of the book, Remote Office Not Required, suggest. They say, go to your boss and propose an experiment. So say maybe for the next 3 months, I'm going to work remotely full time. Or maybe for the next 2 months, I'm going to work from home in the afternoons, or work from home 2 days a week. But set up some very clear parameters for your experiment. And then set up what your success criteria is, so that at the very end, you and your manager are both going to know whether or not the experiment has passed or failed. And then promote the experiment for everyone on your team, so that you've got fairness. Nobody's like, oh, they're the golden child, they get to work remotely. Now, some managers are going to be like, wow, that's a pretty well-reasoned request. Let's try it. Some managers are going to be like, I don't know. What about collaboration and water cooler conversations? Now, with tools like Slack, you can really replicate a lot of those water cooler conversations. I have a feeling some of you have actually been sat in your office and, text chatted with people rather than getting up and talking to them. It's happened to everybody. We're all guilty of this. So you can really replicate a lot of that water cooler conversation online. But a lot of people are going to be like, I just don't feel like you can be as innovative or as collaborative if you're remote. So again, I'm going to reference that book, Remote Office Not Required. What they suggest is bringing everybody together in the same location, maybe once a quarter. Let everybody innovate, and then disperse. Because think about it. How many wildly innovative ideas can your team process and implement at a time? Maybe 2? Maybe 3? So bring everybody together and then disperse, because you're going to be more productive when you are working remotely. When all else fails, talk about the bottom line. Talk about how you're going to save the company money on office space. Talk about how they can hire top talent from anywhere in the world. Talk about how they can reduce attrition rates, but not in a threatening, like I'm going to quit if you don't let me work remotely way, because nobody likes a bully. But talk about that attrition rate. And then talk about how you're going to get a productivity increase, which is going to lead to more profit. All right, so now you have convinced your boss to let you work remotely. We want you to succeed, right? Because we don't want you to fail like this guy. We want you to be the pop star of remote work. So here are my top 5 tips for being a successful remote employee. Number 5, join the right team. Whenever possible, I highly recommend you join a fully distributed team. Why? People have conversations, and they might forget to tell you about them. In my experience, distributed teams are very aware of this happening. One, they schedule meetings to happen. If they have a side conversation, it's in their brain, oh, I need to go tell Lauren about this, because everybody's used to it. Everybody's part of that process. So join a distributed team. Number 4, be productive. Okay, this is obvious. You have to actually do your job and do your job well. So how are you going to do that? Well, I have a daily to-do list. Maybe you've got a prioritized backlog, but make sure you've got a very set list of what's most important. And at the beginning of the day, pick your top 2 or 3 items you're going to tackle. This prevents you from putting off those hard or daunting tasks. It keeps you focused on what's important. And it gives you something to work on every day so you don't get sucked in looking at your Facebook or your Twitter or whatever. You've got to focus. The other thing is create a workspace you love. This is a picture of my office from a couple years ago, and I loved this office because it was bright and pink, and it had lots of windows, and I was happy to go work in it. So don't work from your bed, don't work from your couch, have a desk, have a dedicated workspace that you will enjoy working in that's going to motivate you to work. Number 3, communicate with your team. Nora Denzel gave this amazing keynote a few years ago at the Grace Hopper Celebration of Women in Computing. And one of her main points was to be a great PR agent for yourself. So think about the words that you're using, because people only know about you what you tell them, right? So if somebody says, Lauren, good job on that project, and I say, oh, well, it wasn't really that hard, and so-and-so did this, and whatever, I'm not being a great PR agent for myself. And people are gonna believe you because that's what you're telling them. So be very conscious of the words that you're using. If you get a compliment, forward it on to your boss. If you show up to a Scrum meeting, have things to talk about, right? Be ready to say, you know what, I solved this really hard problem, or I've been working all day on this, and I've been struggling, but I'm gonna make it through, right? Be very conscious of how you're talking about yourself. So be a great PR agent for yourself. Number 2, travel. Okay, you guys are already doing this, so good job, right? But if you get a chance to travel to a conference, it's worth it. You'll get out, meet new people, your ideas will start spinning. It's also really important to travel to meet your teammates. Now, I worked for a company that this was not really possible. There was no way they were gonna allow us to travel just to meet our teammates. And so we had to hack the system a little bit. We would submit conference proposals together so that if we got accepted, we could go meet each other. So if you have to hack the system, hack it. Maybe you're going to go to a conference together. Maybe you're going to go to a client site visit together. But do what it takes to get a chance to meet each other in person and build those personal relationships. Because once you have them, it's so much easier to work with people. All right, and my number 1 tip is to actively prevent burnout. So remember a few minutes ago we talked about one of the downsides to working remotely is that you can actually overwork. So your company has spent so much time hiring you, investing in you, getting you to finally be productive. They don't want to lose you to something stupid like burnout. So you've got to protect yourself. So the easiest way to do this is take a lunch break every day. If you're in the office, people come by, they talk to you, they interrupt you, you get those mental breaks. When you're a remote employee, you don't get them. You can be in the zone for hours. So take a lunch break every day. The other thing I'll encourage you to do here is to figure out what acceptable working hours are for you. So my team knows I'm online at 7 a.m. every day. I'm gonna start wrapping up between 3:30 and 4. Everybody knows this. So at the end of the day, I encourage you to turn off your computer. And that includes turning off your phone notifications, your email, your Slack. Turn off your computer. Allow yourself to unwind so you can come back fresh. It's so easy to get sucked into a work email and start thinking about it. Don't let that happen to you. Actively prevent burnout. All right, so let's recap. Here are my top 5 tips for making remote work really work. So number 5, select the right team. Make sure it's fully distributed if possible. Number 4, be productive. Create a workspace you're going to enjoy working in. Number 3, communicate with your team. Be a great PR agent for yourself. Number 2, travel. You guys are doing this. And number 1, actively prevent burnout. At the end of your day, turn off your computer. All right, we're going to wrap this up. So today we've been asking the question, does remote work really work? And working remotely can be the worst, right? You can fail so hard that people will animate your failures. But working remotely can be the best. You can be the pop star of remote work. So yes, the studies, surveys, and anecdotal evidence all show that remote work really works. I'm not saying that remote work is for everyone, because it's not. But it is a fantastic option for some. Remote work works for the employee, it works for the employer, and it works for the environment. So I want to leave you with one final quote. At the Grace Hopper Celebration of Women in Computing, Tella Whitney was asked if she could change one thing, what it would be. And her response was simple. If I could change anything, it would be that each and every one of you would ask for what she wants. And that's my wish for you today. Whether what you want to do is work a more flexible schedule, to change your role, to take on more responsibility, or to work remotely, I hope that each of you will ask for what you want. So please advocate for the remote work option, advocate for yourself, and advocate for others who want to advance their careers but are not able to be physically present in an office. All right, so end of presentation announcements. The slides are available on my Twitter page already. At the end of the slides, you're going to find an appendix with all of the references to the studies that I mentioned today, as well as links to other studies and articles that I did not have time to get to because I knew that you would be very unhappy with me if I got to all of these. And then also there is a link to the keynote speech that Nora Denzel gave. Seriously, you should go watch it. She's hilarious and she makes amazing points. So go watch that when you get back to work next week. All right, with that, I'm going to wrap up. Thank you so much for coming. Have a great rest of your day.
Hi. I'm sorry, I didn't arrive on time to hear all your presentation, but this struck me just a recent case I had at work. I was assigned to follow up a former employee. They asked me at work to kind of babysit him because there's no other word to describe what happened. He was
Babysit who?
babysit him because they asked me to give to follow him all his current task because he was going to resign from the company. At the time, he was working remotely. The company is based on Monterrey here in Mexico. The employee was working from Aguascalientes, another state. The first thing that struck me that was very weird that they asked me to follow up, to make a report and follow up on what were his current tasks. And I asked him what was going on. And they told me that actually they were asking to leave the company. They leave in 2 weeks because it was an ongoing issue that he was delivering incomplete tasks. He was not completing the test for cases. He was asked to attend certain meetings and always arrived late, or for informal meetings where all the team was present or answered immediately, he was absent. And I told them what happened. They told me that they talked to him several times and asked him what's going on, what happened, why are you not completing your task? They were already working with other teammates or people in other teams that were working remotely, and they never had these kind of issues. But then it struck me that it's possible that this, as you mentioned, he was one of those persons that's not prepared to work remotely. He needed to be constantly vigilant, to attend a 8 to 5 schedule, someone who always, like they say, strike me with, always give him the carrot and stick because he's not going to work properly. But then I also, you give your list of things that we must check in order to make remote work to really work, that probably the bosses or the teammates should have asked him other things that might have been affecting his life or his current situation. Do you know other techniques or maybe type of question that we could make to help people that are struggling to work remotely, to find what's really going on, what are their needs?
Yeah, so it sounds like your question is, it sounds like maybe not everybody's cut out for remote work. So how can we help people be successful as managers? Is that? So I think, one of the important things is you've got to be a hands-on manager. You've got to have weekly one-on-ones with your team. And if people are not up to par, you have to have those hard conversations. A lot can be taken care of if you address it quickly. There's a book, Radical Candor, that talks about how to have those hard conversations. And if you do it quickly with small conversations like, hey, I noticed you're late to this meeting, what's up? Or, hey, it looks like you've been late to the last 3 meetings, what's going on? Or, it looks like you're late, this deliverable is coming in late. Or, maybe we need to have daily scrums and understand, are you staying on progress? So I think having a very hands-on manager is important for some people. And I also think remote work is not perfect for everyone. Some people really need to be in an office. I think if you're going to be working remotely, you have to be very self-motivated and make sure that you care about your career and you care about getting stuff done on time. So I'm not a manager, so I do not have amazing manager advice for you, unfortunately. But yeah. Okay, one more question.
Hi. So I would like to build like a remote team, but I have struggled a little bit to actually see what is important in the culture of the team that we should have. Like, for example, these kind of issues, for example, like being there in time and also keep on the progress. But what do you think are other important things that we should promote in the culture of the team to actually be successful at it?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So I think setting team expectations is really important. So if you send an email, do you expect people to respond instantly? Or is it okay if people are working on their coding and they check their email every 5 hours? Or is it important that people answer their email outside of office hours, or is it fine if they're not? And maybe you encourage them, I don't want you to burn out, don't check your email after hours. So having very clear expectations is important. Knowing what people's core office hours is also really important. So if you're working across different time zones, knowing when people are going to be there on a regular basis is great. There's an app called There, T-H-E-R-E, that we use on our team, and it lets us easily check the time zone for every member on our team. And if they travel, it automatically updates to whatever time zone they're in, so that's really helpful. The other thing that managers have done for me that makes me really happy is sometimes there will be office parties, like holiday parties, and my manager will say, why don't you go out to a movie with your husband and you can expense that, and that will be your holiday party. And that makes me feel really included and valued as a remote employee. Because I've had some teams who will say, okay, we'll be offline this afternoon to go to the holiday party, and I was like, okay, I guess I'll be sitting at my desk working, right? And so you want to make sure that your remote employees feel valued.
And thank you very much, Lauren.